All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Rafa Ramadorai, the director of the Thermo Fisher Scientific Junior Innovators Challenge, and I'm here with my colleagues Alex Grace and Jenna DeLuca, and we are so glad that you could join us for today's webinar. So today we're going to talk about how to showcase your research within the application and learn some do's and don'ts when it comes to part three, which is the project information section, the visual aid. We're going to talk about citations and a lot more. But before we get started, I wanted to highlight that we have several other webinars here on this YouTube channel if you're looking for more basic information about the competition and tips on how to complete your applications. So be sure to check those out. If you have questions during today's webinar, feel free to type them in the live chat box on the right-hand side of the screen. We're going to answer questions throughout and via chat, but also save some time at the end to go through any that we might have missed. And you can always email us at jic@societyforscience.org at any time, and we'll be sure to get back to you. And as a reminder, we are always here to help. This session is also being recorded and will be on our YouTube page later this week, so you can look back at it if you'd like. And other students who can't join us today can also get this information. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So a little bit about Society for Science. So Thermo Fisher JIC is a program of Society for Science, which is the organization that myself, Alex, and Jenna work for. The Society is a nonprofit dedicated to expanding scientific literacy, effective STEM education, and scientific research. And our vision is to promote the understanding and appreciation of science and the vital role it plays in human advancement, to inform, educate, and inspire. We do this by hosting science competitions and also publishing Science News, which is an award-winning flagship magazine with the most important science news from all fields and applications of STEM. And Science News Explorers is our award-winning publication dedicated to students, parents, and teachers, used by nearly 4 million visitors a year. So in addition to Thermo Fisher JIC, the Society runs 2 high school STEM research competitions. One is the Regeneron International Science and Engineering Fair, which is the world's largest international high school research competition, and the Regeneron Science Talent Search, which is the nation's oldest and most prestigious science and math competition for high school seniors. Thermo Fisher JIC is also made possible by our friends and sponsor, Thermo Fisher Scientific. Thermo Fisher is committed to cultivating generations of science, technology, engineering, and math professionals that fuel innovation and solve the world's most complex problems. So, a little bit more about the competition. Thermo Fisher JIC is the premier national STEM research competition for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students. The first part of the competition consists of a written application. So this is where you tell us all about your research project. And in the application, you'll also be asked a little bit beyond your research project. You'll be asked to describe your interests and hobbies, respond to a few creative essays, and more. The judges then review all of this information to ultimately select the top 300 junior innovators and 30 finalists that participate in the second part of the competition, which is Finals Week. And we'll talk about that on this next slide. So how do I become a 2026 Thermo Fisher JIC finalist? So if you're here, that means you've already probably completed the first few steps in this image, but your first step is to complete a STEM research project while you're in 6th, 7th, or 8th grade. Then you have to compete at a society-affiliated science and engineering fair and receive a nomination to compete by placing in the top 10% of that fair. So if you're here, scroll back a second. If you're watching this webinar, that means you've probably already completed those first 3 steps, so that's great. It is a huge honor just to make it to the top 10% of your local science fair. You're amongst the top 10% of middle school students competing in science fair across the United States. So that is a huge accomplishment that you should be really, really proud of. Hopefully you're working on this next step, step number 4 here, which is completing and submitting the online application. Our deadline is June 10th this year. And from there, like I said earlier, Evaluators and judges will go and read through all of those applications and select the top 300 junior innovators. And this is kind of like our semifinalist stage. And those top 300 are going to be announced on September 2nd this year. Then you don't have to do any additional steps. The top 30 finalists will be announced on September 16th this year. Finally, those top 30 finalists will compete in finals week of the competition here in Washington, D.C. in October. This year is going to be from October 23rd through 28th. And if you want to learn more about what finals week is, I would recommend checking out our highlights video that we share in email probably all the time. And also some of our other webinars, like I mentioned earlier, cover what to expect for in finals week in detail. And we're also going to be hosting another webinar later this spring featuring some of those finalists who will come back as alumni and talk about their experience during finals week as well. So now on to showcasing your research in the application. So part 3 is the first thing that we're going to talk about today. And this task is all about your research project. This section, in addition to your visual aid, which we're going to talk about in a second as well, are the 2 main sections where you're going to highlight your research. So think about this section and your visual aid kind of combined as your poster that you might have presented at your local science fair. So a couple of basic things to keep in mind about this section within the application. There are word limits on all of the questions. So you can answer each question however you'd like within those word limits. That means you can type out paragraphs if you'd like. You could use bullet points if you'd like. A lot of students, and you can switch that up between each question as well. A lot of students like to use bullet points, for example, in the methodology, if you're just listing out the steps that you followed to do your research project. And another important point I want to note here is that you do not have to use all of the words within the word limit for a particular question as well. It's okay to be short and sweet. And we actually recommend being as concise as you can in your responses. So it's totally fine to not use all of the words and max that out. There are 2 pages in the application for this section, so make sure you scroll all the way to the bottom of that task and hit next page once you've completed all the questions on page 1, and that will take you to page 2. So remember to do that. You don't want to be caught on the last day of the deadline and realize that there's a whole second page that you have to fill out. And then there are, again, this section of the application is mostly about your research project. It's going to look really familiar if you've done your science fair posters. Again, all the kind of basic sections from what's your hypothesis or what's your engineering design criteria to your methodology to your conclusions. But it also asks a few additional questions that just help provide more context to your research. So we're going to ask where you conducted your research. Did you do it at home? Did you do it at school? Did you do it out in the field? We're going to ask who helped you. And Jenna's going to talk a little bit more about that section in a minute as well. But these are all questions that help provide the full picture of your research experience this year. So you might be wondering, okay, I did my project, but how do I stand out for the application? Something that the judges and evaluators really value is explaining why. So they want to know why you chose to do what you did for your research project. If you used certain variables, can you explain why those variables were important to look at based on your research question? Can you explain why you chose to use certain methodology or certain statistical analyses as you're looking at your data? That's going to be a really big part of your application. So you want to make sure you're highlighting that as much as possible when you're answering those questions in part 3. It's also really important to explain when you know something went wrong. It's totally okay if your hypothesis was proven wrong, right? That happens all the time. That doesn't mean that your science fair project wasn't important. It's really important to learn from what those mistakes are. And then in the next time you or someone else wants to learn about that same research question, they can change things up. So it's important to explain if you know something went wrong, Why do you think that was? Uh, do you know what you would change the next time you did the same project, or what you might, do differently in a new iteration of your project? It's also really important to be honest in your answers. You don't have to overstate anything that you've done. It's actually really important that you don't overstate what you've done and be honest about your role in your research, and what you accomplished in your project. Um, Judges are really good at sniffing out when students might be over exaggerating their contributions to their research. And it's important to be passionate. You did all of this hard work. You probably already are really passionate about your project, and you chose your research question because it's something that you care about. And it might be something that affects you or your family, or your community. And so talk about your inspiration, right? Talk about why you decided to do this research project, why it's important to you, and why it's important, should be important to other people. If you're excited about your project, the judges and evaluators are going to get excited about it too. So make sure that comes across in your responses. A few rules to know that we get a lot of questions on. And hopefully you might have already seen these in our different frequently asked questions that we have available, but never hurts to go through them again. So as a reminder, you have to submit the project that earned you the nomination to compete at Thermo Fisher JIC. That means whatever project you entered at your local science fair, that's the project that you need to write about in your application. This also means that you can add more data to your project as long as it's the same intent and methodology as that original project. So say, you just want to conduct more trials and get more data and do some more analysis on that. That's totally fine. You shouldn't be changing any of the variables that you tested. You shouldn't be changing the methodology that you used. If you did an engineering project, for example, you don't want to change the prototype at all. You should be talking about the project as it was when you entered and competed at your science fair. There's a lot of different reasons for that, but one important reason that I want to stress here is that that project should have been reviewed by your science fair's scientific review committee. So we really want to make sure that you're continuing to be safe when you conduct your research, and that these projects, they've already been vetted. So we want to make sure that you're submitting that vetted project to the Thermo Fisher JIC. And then another note that I want to point out that we get a lot of questions on, is that the application itself, all of the questions, that's the only material that our evaluators and judges are going to look at when they're evaluating your project. So any additional supplemental uploads or links to external sites are not permitted within the application. The only external sites that are permitted in the application are when you are using them for citations or references. We're going to talk about that in a second as well. But again, the judges are only going to review the written responses that are in your application and in the visual aid. The content that's in your visual aid. There shouldn't be essays in the visual aid, and we're also going to talk about that in a second as well. So a few additional resources to help with part 3. We have a whole walkthrough video that looks at each question of part 3 in detail. So you can refer to that. That's on our YouTube page for additional information. We also recommend writing your responses out in a separate Word document. Once you know in the application what those word limits are, type it out in Word or Google Docs or some other kind of system. That way you always have a copy of it. If anything technically went wrong in the application, you have a copy and you're not scrambling at the last minute. And that helps just kind of put things together all on one page for you. That might be easier to think about your project. And then another tip that we have is to record your responses out loud and then transcribe them. We've tried to write part 3 in a way that should feel similar to a judging interview. We know that you all have done those judging interviews at your local science fair. So you can think about it as if you are just talking to a judge or a friend or a parent teacher about your project. And if you start talking about those answers, and that might help you get your ideas flowing and make it easier for you to then write out those responses. So a little bit more about citations, like I mentioned earlier. All entrants have the option to cite the resources that you used when you're doing your research project. This could be websites or books or other tools like online data sets that you use to come up with your research topic, conduct background research, or complete the project overall. There are two questions in particular that ask for sources in part 3 of the application. The first is the project background. So we ask, what did you look up as you were learning about your project, the topic of your project, right? Did you learn about it in school? Did you go online and read some articles about your topic before you started conducting your research? That's a great section to list any sources that you might have used. And then at the very end of part 3, there is a question that asks for your references and citations. This is optional, it is not required, but it is recommended. So we do highly encourage applicants to use that section to fill out citations if you have them. Jenna's going to talk a little bit more about what those citations can look like. We know citations could be new if you maybe haven't learned them in school. We talk about there's options that you have for listing those references, but it's always a benefit to include some references there if you have them. One thing we also want to point out is do not use AI to generate your citations or format your citations. Again, Jenna's going to talk about AI use in just a minute, but they often don't help and they actually can hurt. So it's better to just, when in doubt, use a link, use something else to help compile those citations for you, but AI is not going to be the best resource for you to use for citations. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jenna.
Thanks, Reva. So yeah, if you want to go to the next slide, please. So just a quick about me. I got my bachelor's of science in biology with a minor in chemistry from St. Mary's College. Then I went and did a PhD in an immunology lab at Miami University. And then I most recently, before coming to the society, was a postdoctoral fellow at the National Institutes of Health. So now I work as the Scientific Integrity Officer at the society. So part of that role is reviewing the rules and policies for our competitions that Reva talked about, but also reviewing projects and making sure that all of our applicants and finalists are following scientific and academic integrity to the best of their ability. So if you'd go to, yeah, thanks. So something that's really important in science today is that we need to know what is true in science. There are quite a few challenges that science is facing today, and one of the most important things that we need to focus on is that science relies on trust. People that are reading our work, whether it's your JIC application or a published paper, they need to be able to trust that what they're reading is true and accurate. There have been a wave of retractions as journals and people like us are cracking down on academic and scientific integrity so that people can trust and know that what they're reading is verified, legitimate science. So if you go to the next slide. So one of the things that we're going to talk about is defining scientific integrity. So this involves conducting and communicating science with transparency, honesty, and accountability. So scientific integrity isn't just bad science or fraud, but it's also, like I said, fostering trust. Without scientific integrity, we lose our credibility and the ability to make informed decisions on reliable findings. So if we can't trust what's in a publication and trust the outcomes and the data that they're presenting, we can't make our own conclusions and future studies and things like that. So if you would just put in the chat as we do this, just a quick little poll to see if you're all paying attention. What of the following would you classify as scientific misconduct? So the first one, A, is changing a data point to better fit a hypothesis, forgetting to cite a source for a minor detail, making up data for an experiment that didn't happen, copying a paragraph directly from ChatGPT without a citation, or accidentally miscalculating a result. So I'll give you all a couple of seconds and then we'll talk through this. So as those come in, we can just talk through this. So the first one, changing a data point to fit our hypothesis. This is absolutely scientific misconduct. We never want to change a data point, even if it doesn't fit with what we want or the results that we were expecting to see. Sometimes that's science, and we learn a lot from the things that we may not have expected. Forgetting to cite a source is not scientific misconduct. We all make mistakes. Sometimes that's a bigger mistake than we would intend, but we all make mistakes and that's understandable. C is similar to A. We would never want to make up a data point for an experiment that didn't happen. That's something that I think is really difficult when you're under tight time crunches and you have to get things done in a specific amount of time. But we always want to make sure that if an experiment didn't happen, we don't claim that it did. Another big thing is copying a paragraph directly from ChatGPT. So we should never, ever do that. That's basically a form of plagiarism. And the work that you are presenting and the work that is being presented in scientific publications, if we're putting our name on it, that means that the expectation is that we wrote that. We took the time to write that and verify that. And so you wouldn't copy and paste directly from a scientific journal. That's standard plagiarism, and it's the same with ChatGPT. And E, accidentally miscalculating a result. Again, that's not scientific misconduct. Accidents and mistakes happen. But reviewing your work and going through it, we've all made mistakes. I've done that. And you just have to go back and fix it. And that's why I'm not sure if any of you have seen this, but not necessarily with accidentally miscalculating a result, but sometimes journals will have, at least scientific journals will have articles that say correction at the front. And they'll say something like, we accidentally got this data wrong, or we interpreted it incorrectly, and here's how we think it actually should be. So that's not misconduct. That's just accidents and mistakes happen. So in the next couple of slides, we're going to go through some case studies, and a poll should come up for you all with each of them. And we will have you answer those as we go through them. So the first one is regarding image manipulation. So let's say you're completing a microbiology project that looks at the effect of pH on bacterial growth. You take pictures of your findings, you look at the plates and take photos. And as your science fair is coming up, you start putting together your poster and you can't find these images. You're unable to find ones of the neutral pH plates that show the bacterial growth. So instead, you search online for pictures of petri dishes with bacterial growth similar to what you remembered. So you edit an image that you find online to see if that more closely resembles to get something that resembles your setup, and you claim it as your own. So the poll should be coming up, but the first question is, or the first option is this appropriate? So yes, it's appropriate. B, it's only appropriate if you cite the image as created by student, or C, it's not appropriate under any circumstances. So I will give you all a second there with that. So hopefully you all are in agreement that this is not appropriate under any circumstances. This should never happen. You only want to claim work that is your own, and you would never want to take somebody else's image and claim it as yours. That is a surefire way to get in trouble. Sometimes people will do that with scientific publications, and the journal will say, "Hey, we reverse image searched this and we found it elsewhere." and your paper doesn't get accepted. And that's also something that we look for whenever we are reviewing applications to our competitions. So we will go on to the next one, AI and research. I feel like this is a really hot topic right now. This case study is involving how you spend your summer completing your research at a local university. You spend hours in the lab each day collecting and analyzing data, but the time comes for you to write your report and you're just swamped with your classes, your exams, and college applications. So this is in the future. You decide to use ChatGPT to write your report. You submit all the data that you collected, so it's all the work that you've done, but you ask AI to write the document for you, including citing your references and writing a bibliography. So for this one, do we think it is A, appropriate? B, it's only appropriate if the full use of AI was disclosed? Or C, it's not appropriate under any circumstances? So I'll give you all a couple seconds here. So this one is also not appropriate under any circumstances. Again, we don't want to claim things that we did not write ourselves. While we would like any use of AI to be disclosed, this is not a situation where the use of AI is acceptable. So yeah, this is not something that you would ever want to do, especially because we know that AI can make mistakes, and we'll talk about that a bit more in a bit. So then our third case study is about collaboration. So this is a bit about adult support, like Reva mentioned. We have some more slides to talk about this in a bit, but for this one, you're inspired by the work that's done in the department where your aunt works at your local university. While your aunt does not have the time to mentor you, she offers to have one of her grad students mentor you. Your project goes well, and you earn a nomination to apply to Thermo Fisher Scientific Junior Innovators Challenge. Since your aunt only knew your mentor casually, you don't disclose that your mentor is your aunt's graduate student, and that's how you gained access to their lab, sorry. So for this one, do we think A, it's appropriate? B, it's only appropriate if you disclose the relationship between your aunt and your mentor, or C, it's not appropriate under any circumstance. So for this one, this is fine. It's great to have outside support. We all need help with science. But this is only going to be appropriate if you disclose the relationship between your aunt and your mentor, no matter how close they are or how well they know each other. The fact that you were able to get access to this lab because of your aunt, whereas you wouldn't have had that opportunity necessarily otherwise, it's really important to let us know that that's how that came about. So a little bit more about adult support. We have just some kind of ideas of what's acceptable and not acceptable. So an acceptable use of adult support would be asking an adult to help proofread your application responses. This is great. Absolutely. Get all the help that you can get. However, having an adult draft your application responses or copying sections of an adult's paper is not acceptable. Like I've said a few times, sorry if you're tired of hearing me say it, we never want to put our names on things that we didn't write ourselves. So making sure that it is your own individual work is really important. So something that is acceptable is citing visuals taken or created by your mentor and your visual aid. This is great. You don't have to make everything from scratch. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's important to give credit where credit is due, and sometimes your mentor has a really great image or graphic that you want to use. That's fine. Just make sure that you give them credit for that. However, using visuals that is created by somebody else and claiming it as your own is never okay. Um, Having an adult help review your citations, again, this is great. Sometimes we make mistakes, so having another set of eyes on things is really helpful. I always had my mom, I think even when I was in graduate school, I had my mom read all of my papers just to check my grammar. She's not a scientist, but just to check and make sure that I didn't make any silly mistakes. Um, However, using a bibliography of a mentor's paper or any paper that you come across with similar research is not okay. You want to make sure that you're actually interacting with the literature and the papers that you're citing in your bibliography. So if you didn't read it yourself, don't put it in your bibliography. And then having your parent or guardian or your science teacher help supervise your project in the classroom and then writing about it in your application is great. Again, take all the help that you can get. Science isn't done in a vacuum. So making sure that you have help and supervision is great. However, if you cite that an adult or a mentor supervised your project when they didn't, that is a big red flag and not acceptable. We want to be as truthful as possible. And if you needed supervision because there was some more dangerous or risky aspect of your project and you realized after the fact you didn't have it, is never okay to then make that up. So we're gonna move forward a little bit and talk about AI. I know that this is a really, really hot topic right now. So to kind of go through this, we have made an AI usage guide that is in the educator guide for ISEF. Um, and it's part of the international rules and in the special or separate guidebook that we have developed from the American History Association on AI in education. And I won't go through all of this with you, but we kind of worked through some scenarios where you have a task that you want to use AI for, and when or it is or isn't acceptable. So I'll just go through the first one. If you ask AI to identify or summarize key points in an article before you read it, and then you use that as a starting point for your literature review, yes, that's acceptable, and we don't necessarily need citations for this, but a disclosure of that's how you used AI would be great. But it has to be a starting point, and then you do have to go and actually read those articles if you find that they are something that is useful before you're going to put them in your bibliography. So this guide just basically explains the acceptable use and not acceptable use of AI. We don't want generative AI, so ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, any of those to be used to write your application responses or to generate citations. It's also really important that you don't use it to format your citations. This is something that we've seen quite a bit of, and we've tested it ourselves, that AI makes mistakes, even if you're saying, hey, here's, a title and authors of the paper, can you put this in APA format? It still can make mistakes. So we encourage, you can use AI in student research, but it must be cited and disclosed properly. And there are references to AI usage in the official rules and ISEF, in the ISEF guidelines for AI usage. Anything else that I missed there, Reva?
No, that covers it. Thanks, Jenna. And yeah, just to kind of reiterate, um, how to cite that in the JIC application if you've used AI for anything in your project. Talk about that, I think, most naturally in the project background section or, your methodology. We know a lot of students in their research projects use LLMs for like just as the basis of their project, right? That's fine. You're using it as part of your research. But like Jenna said, the things that are going to be flags are using that for writing out those application responses or generating citations. Those two are the big red flags and no-nos.
Okay, so like I mentioned, one of the problems that we've run into is issues with citations. So any format is okay. If you are concerned or if you have a doubt, just include a link. There are tools like EasyBib or Zotero that manage your citations. Not sure how much this is used nowadays, but when I was in college, Mendeley was an easy way to manage your sources. And then I did you end up using things like EndNote, which is a paid program, but is really great for making citations that in a way that doesn't rely on AI. So every researcher relies on the research of others. So citing the sources that you used is really important for not only giving credit, but also helping to show what work is yours and what came from somewhere else. Where did you get this idea? Where did you get this method? Or did you come up with this method on your own? So I've included an example of a citation. I think I just went on the Nature Immunology Journal website and found a recent article. And this is something that would look like a really kind of detailed full citation. So it has almost all of the authors. There were a ton on this one. So all of the authors, and then there's an ellipses before the final author, the date, the title. So that Nature Immunology that's in italics, that's the journal. And then it has the volume and issue. So that's the 26, and then in parentheses 6, and then the page numbers. And then at the end is a link. It's a DOI, that's the digital object identifier. This is something that has been assigned to basically every scientific, or not even scientific, any published journal article. So they all get what's called a DOI. And this is kind of a permanent link. It's not a URL because URLs can change or things like that. This is a permanent number or identifier that is linked to every article and is a surefire way to make sure that, if I want this article about cholinergic regulation, it's taking me to that one. Something that we found specifically with AI is that it has a really hard time matching DOIs to the correct journal article. So that's something that's really important, that if against all of our recommendations you use AI, that's something that you need to verify every single source and every single detail in your citations, which at that point it's just easier to either do it yourself, the way that we had to in the old days before AI, which doesn't take too long, or use other methods like EasyBib or things like that to make sure that your information is accurate. So if we want to look at some red flags on citations, I'm using the same exact citation and showing you different ways that you could or should cite it. So the first one there with 3 stars is the one that I had on the last page that has almost all of the authors and almost all of the details that we could get. So authors, date, title, journal, volume issue, page numbers, and DOI. Other common ways to cite that are better but not best is giving at least the first author, the date, the title, and the journal. What is less great is just giving the title, because sometimes that's not necessarily enough if articles are really similar. So trying to give as much information as possible does help. And then the final 2, which is kind of our least great on the scale there, are just either a link to the article or just the DOI. These are fine if you do these, but giving us as much information as possible is always better. And then finally, to wrap up my bit, the scientific integrity in part 3, things to just kind of note is make sure you disclose if your parents or guardians work in the STEM field. We want to know that, is this something that you talked about at the dinner table with your family and that's how you got the idea? Or, your mom is a doctor and you decided that you want to do something in the field that she studies. That's important information for us. It's also important for us to know what kind of support you received, so that we know that, you came up with this on your own or you had a little bit of help, which is fine. We also want to know if you had any paid programs that you participated in for your Thermo Fisher Scientific JIC project. This is really important information for us. It's never a bad thing. We just want to know who helped you and how did you get this help? And finally, like I said, check your citations.
Thanks so much, Jenna. Before we move on to our visual aid section, I'm just seeing a few questions in the chat that I thought might be helpful to answer now. And so just to reiterate the information Jenna shared, and maybe expand on some things, it's totally fine to use APA, MLA, whatever you're most comfortable with for the site. So for the citations question in the application, you can use, like Jenna said, those kind of more simplified versions, especially if you find you're running short on the word count. There is a word count for the reference list question. But we want to see their most kind of used or referenced citations, references, sources in that section. So you can prioritize that way and then just provide links if you really can't fit too much more text in there. The most important part there is that you are not that you check that that information that you're giving us in that section is correct. That's why we're saying don't use AI. We know AI makes mistakes. Things like Noodle Bib, Noodle Tools, Easy Bib, those are more reliable. But if you're not writing the citation yourself, just do a double check to make sure that, the authors listed are actually the authors that wrote the paper. That if you have a link, that DOI link that Jenna talked about, it's not broken and it goes to an article that is the article you are citing. Those are going to be really important things that you want to make sure are correct in your references list. I think those were the kind of main questions that I've seen pop up. But like I said, continue to ask them in the chat, or you can always email us at jic@societyforscience.org if you have more questions about your citations, particularly. All right, and then I'll hand it over to Alex.
All right, we're going to talk about something that we also get a lot of questions on. So the visual aid. Go to the next slide. All right, so visual aid. Each nominee is required to submit a visual aid as part of the application. So like you had at your science fair, you had your project board, which included all of the written stuff and all of the photos you have. So the way that we do this in the application is a lot of what you would have been talking about in your interview or having had written on the board, you'd put in part 3, and the most important images, graphs, diagrams, or what you're going to put on your visual aid. So the visual aid is meant to be a distilled version of the most important visuals to help support what you wrote in part 3. So a couple of things. There are some things you must do for your visual aid. And those are, the document cannot be more than 2 pages. It can be 1 or 2 pages. And this is a virtual document, so 2 digital pages, or one side, if you were to print it out, one side front and back, or 2 single-sided pages. Sized 8.5 by 11, so that's a piece of printer paper, so 2 pieces of that. It has to be uploaded into the application as a PDF, and you need to include citations. And we'll cover more about how to cite images you created or didn't create later. Some of the things your visual aid cannot include: active hyperlinks or QR codes to external websites. These will not be clicked, and you could get a violation of the rules, so do not do that. Nobody will go and look at them. So you don't want to waste your space on the visual aid with that. Videos or audio embedded within the visual aid will also not be watched, or identifiable photographs of yourself or any other human participants. Go to the next slide. So those are things you must do and must not do. Then we have some recommendations. What we recommend that you do not have to follow these. These are not hard and fast rules, but we recommend that the visual aid should be created such that the entire page is visible and readable at the same time at 100% zoom. The page background color should be a light color, and the text color predominantly dark to support readability. We recommend a minimum font size of about 10 to 12 points for figure captions and citations, and larger font sizes are recommended for readability. Anything smaller than that, we really won't be able to read it. Figure captions should be kept brief. So you can put them in paragraph form, or like write it out a little blurb, or bullet points, whatever is the easiest way to describe what the visual is that you've put on there. But you do not need to include a lot of information because you've already included a lot of written information in part 3 of the application. And you do not need to include your name or project title. We have that all over the application, so don't need to waste any space on that document where you're trying to fit in all the good stuff with your name and your title. All right. And really quickly, before we go over this, we're going to hop into some examples of what your visual aid could look like. So the visual aid can look like anything you want it to. We have put together 3 examples of what it could look like, and I'll point out why these are good examples and different things about them that make them good options. So this is page structure example number 1. For this one, we have 3 different visuals. And for this, we have the caption for the visuals right underneath them, and this is labeled as visual 1, caption for visual 1, and the citation for it is right below it. So what you can do, you can have your citations and your captions listed right with each image. You could also do something like this one, for example, number 2, where you have maybe the caption for the images is right next to them, but you do your citations in a bulleted list where you have connected, this is labeled as image graph visual number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and you list your citations with 1, 2, 3, and 4 to make it very clear what you're citing, even if the citation is not right next to the image. And another example here, you have maybe 3 images that came from the same site or you created with the same software. And so you can do captions in bullet point format here too. And if you have the same citation for a group of images, you can do citate, figures 1, 2, and 3 were created by the student in Canva or Excel, as an example. So this is another way you can do that. Again, the most important thing is that you don't try to cram too much information onto the visual aid, because, like we'll see here, things are too small, they're not legible. So a couple things not to do. Entrance should not include images that are too small to be clear and visible and readable at 100% zoom. So these charts, while you can see the bars, you can't really read the actual data on them, right? So it's too small to be legible. Other thing about this page is that there's no citations for these graphs. And so you need to cite every image on the visual aid. Some more things not to do. Active hyperlinks, as I said before, QR codes should not be included. The only time when a hyperlink would be included in the visual aid is part of a citation like you see here. Another thing, any videos or audio embedded within the visual aid, there should not be any of that. And there also shouldn't be any identifiable photographs of yourself or any human participants. So in these images, showing you some examples of how to include images of people or maybe yourself doing the experiment without being identifiable. So in this one, we've put a little blur over our scientist's face. And so they are not identifiable in this photo. This one, you can't see any faces. So you're seeing humans doing science, but they're not identifiable people. And the same thing here, we had them sort of in the corner, but they're sort of covered up. So these are acceptable iterations of having photos of humans on your visual aid. But we do not want to see identifiable photos of you or any other people. Another big question we get, the visual aid should not be your digital poster, a photograph of your project board, or presentation slides. These are not readable at the scale that we're putting them on the screen, and they also you haven't distilled down the real information we need from the visual aid. So you can take the sort of most important images, graphs from your poster, distill them, put them on a document with just captions, but we don't need all the other writing that's on the board because you've already put that in the application elsewhere. And you also, as we've said, you do not need to include a summary of your background, methods, data analysis, etc., because you've already put that in part 3 of the application, so you don't need to have that on your visual aid. All right. We're going to switch back to the presentation. We have an overview table of do's and don'ts. All right, great. So yes, to go over quickly, you should include clear, easy read images, brief captions, cite every visual, choose the most important visuals, and blur or cover the faces of people in your, if any pictures of people. You should not upload a digital poster or photo of your project board. You should not include long paragraphs because you've already done that written work in part 3 of the application. You should not utilize graphics you did not make without saying where they came from. You should not include active hyperlinks, and you should not include identifiable photos of people. Right. Some questions we get a lot are, what should I put on my visual aid? So here are some examples. This is not an exhaustive list, but this is meant to give you examples of what you might include in your visual aid, and every project is different. So use your judgment to determine what is most important for you to share about your project. But let's say you did an experiment. You might want to include photos of your experimental setup or step-by-step of your procedure. You could include tables or graphs or charts with important data from the outcome of your project. You could show an image or a mock-up of your experimental design or prototype or the invention that you made. If you have a math project, you might not have a physical experiment in front of you, but this is where you could share proofs or relevant equations. If you did a coding project, this is also could be a place where you might want to highlight the most important code. You want to make sure it's readable on the page, but if there's a really important thing you want to show, this could be the place to do that. If you have sort of a flow chart describing the system or the neural network or the LLM that you built or anything else that could be best described by a flow, this could be a good place to put something like that. You could also put illustration of chemicals or biological systems studied, and images that illustrate results like petri dishes or a change in a research area. These are all examples, again, not exhaustive, but to give you an idea of what could be helpful to support your written responses in part 3 on the visual aid. And then real quick, FAQ, you can use either portrait or vertical orientation of the paper. The digital document does not matter to us, however you would like. You do not need to include your name or project title. You can save this space. We have it elsewhere in the application. If you have too many visuals, we understand these are projects you worked very hard on, worked for a long time. You've got lots of images of what you've done. We really recommend you just prioritize the visuals that show the significance of your research. So what do you have to prove, disprove? What do you have out of the work that you've done? What is most important for our evaluators to see? And if you completed a team project, you can have the same visual aid as your teammates, but you don't have to. So if there's parts of it that you want to highlight that your teammate doesn't, you can highlight different things, but it is okay to have the same visual aid, but you each should be completing the written part of the application in your own words. So we have this resource, and there's a lot of questions about citations. We talked about citations earlier, but specifically for images. There is a guide that exists that we will have that is linked in the application on the resource page. It's also, the link is here, and we will put it in the caption of this webinar after we are done tonight, that lays out examples for how to cite images you created, you didn't create, based on where they came from. And so you need to cite everything, but this guide can be very helpful to you to figure out how to do that. If you created a graphic or took a photo, you should use a citation like photo taken by student or a graph created by student. You do not need to include your name in these citations. That saying photo taken by student is enough for us to know where the image came from. I will pass it back to Reva for the end.
Thank you, Alex. So I'm going to breeze through this last bit pretty quickly, but since we've talked a lot about how to showcase your research in the application, wanted to just briefly talk about what you can expect if you are named a top 30 finalist and you are so showcasing your research during finals week. So there's kind of two sections or two times during finals week when you're going to talk about your research project. The first is project judging. This is going to be the first judging day of finals week here in DC. This is going to be very similar to what you would expect or what you have already experienced at your local science fairs. Members of our judging panel come around to each finalist and they will ask in-depth questions about your project. These judges, different from your science fair, have already read your applications, so they know a lot about your research already. So you'll get coaching if you're named a top 30 finalist by our staff, and we have detailed guides that we sent out with information about kind of how to prepare. But it's not going to be as much of give me your 5-minute project spiel, right? It's going to be a judge asking you a specific question about your methodology or a graph that you have. And so it's a little different from your local science fair in that way. And again, we'll help prepare finalists in that time between the announcement and finals week. And then we have our project showcase, and this is a time where we like to invite friends of the Society for Science, Thermo Fisher Scientific, friends and family of the finalists, and the general public in the DC area to come and talk to you about your project. So in this part of the day, which is the afternoon after project judging, this is where you're going to be using more kind of layman's terms to explain your project. You want to make it understandable for the general public. And you will receive more coaching and information from our communications team to help you prepare. All right, so now we're going to stop our presentation and go through some questions. We have a few minutes left. So I know I saw a bunch about citations, and I think Alex hopefully answered a lot of those that were coming in earlier with the citations guide. But again, if you have created something, think about the kind of 3 main parts of the citation for images that we'll want to see are: where did they come from? Did you make it? Who made it? What did you use to make it? Was it Excel? Was it Google Sheets? Was it some other kind of software? And then when did you make it? Did you make it in 2026? Was it older? So those are kind of the 3 main kind of parts that you would think about, including in your citations, but definitely reference that guide that Alex shared. That will be your best source for how to cite every image properly. Seen some questions about adult support and kind of parental involvement, and is it okay if my parent was a mentor or my parent connected me to a lab? How will that affect judging? That's all perfectly fine. We all have connections to STEM. I mean, when I was back in my day doing high school research, I had adults help me. I had my school help connect me to a lab. That's all fine. You're middle school students, and that's kind of expected. But it's only going to be a problem if you don't disclose that in the application. So like Jenna talked about, there's different places in the application where you can talk about it, but definitely talk about the fact that your parent is your mentor, or your parent connected you to someone, or your teacher connected you to someone. If you don't talk about that and that comes up later, it's found out, and it wasn't disclosed in your application, that is when it could become a problem. Saw a few more questions about the visual aid, and I just want to clarify that, like Alex said, you shouldn't be uploading a picture of your project board, any physical project board, really anything physical that you've taken. If you just take a picture of that, print out, poster, whatever it is, and upload that, it's not really going to showcase your visuals in the best way. So we do recommend using something like a PowerPoint slide, or just to format things, or Google Slides to format things. But again, within those 2 digital pages, that limit. But it should be a digital visual aid that you are uploading into the application rather than a picture of a hard copy of something. I think I saw a question about using AI for code, and I don't have the exact question here. If you're using AI to debug code, you'll want to talk about that in your application. You'll want to make sure you're mentioning it. If you are using AI to generate code that you're then using in your project, and you don't say that, then that's going to be a scientific integrity issue. Jenna, anything to kind of explain or elaborate on that front?
Yeah, no, just if you do use that, save your prompts. I know that most of these can say, if you're like logged into an account or something like that, you can save your prompts. So like what you asked ChatGPT, for example, just save it in case we have questions about it and you want to know where the source of the code was.
Thanks, Jenna. Great advice.
Something I'm seeing in the chat a bit is that folks are concerned about the word count and the citations, and that we want more detail, but there's only so many words they can use to respond to those questions. What's your recommendation?
Yeah, my recommendation, Jenna, feel free to jump in as well. But again, prioritize the sources that you're using. So I think we recommend, if your whole research project was based on one paper that had an idea and you took that idea and elaborated on it, you're definitely going to want to cite that source. If something was used in a much more insignificant way, it's okay if you don't have space for it. Really think about it as it's an optional section. We recommend, like we've said, to use citations and to have those references there if you've already generated citations for your posters or papers that you've done. But it is optional. So I think the biggest red flags for that section is if you are citing sources that you didn't make, that are incorrect, that have incorrect information, that's when it's going to be a flag. I saw some other questions about using in-text citations, which is also great if you want to talk about, in your methodology, you've used the methods that exist, from a paper that you found or a website, and you want to cite that within the methodology, that's fine. If you're doing that, you definitely need to include that source in the references section, the full citation, whether it's the link or ideally, like Jenna pointed out, the full kind of information with the authors, publication date, journal, all of that information. So that's the point that I just want to make for in-text citations. All right. And you should not have any videos in your application or visual aid anywhere. So this application does not call for video submissions. If you try to include them in your visual aid or the application in any way, that could lead to a failure to qualify. So please do not include any external sources to videos that you've made about your project. All right, I know there are so many more questions coming in, so we unfortunately do have to end our webinar for tonight, but please do email us at jic@societyforscience.org if we weren't able to get to your question tonight, and we will get to that, get to your email in the inbox within the next couple of days. We have staff that are going to start ramping up how often we're checking that inbox, even after hours and over the weekends as we get closer to the application deadline. So we want to know that we are here for you to help you as you complete your application. And good luck. Thank you so much for joining us. You guys are doing an amazing job already and definitely taking the right steps by tuning in and learning more about how to put your best foot forward in the application. And that's what we're here to help you with. So thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your evenings, and we hope to see you at our next webinar.